Hi friends, this is your pal Scott Garibay, and today we're going to talk about Dungeons and Dragons, and we are going to talk specifically about Professor Dungeon Master and what it's like to meet Professor Dungeon Master in person. All right, so let's talk about it. All right, so first of all, that's Professor Dungeon Master in the picture there, and and I met him at the Philadelphia Area Gaming Expo, which is in Oaks, Pennsylvania. 1,800 people attended. It was one of the best conventions I've ever been to in my entire life. I really had a blast. It was really excellent. I really had a wonderful time, and it was really special and it was unique, and I really absolutely loved it, and I couldn't speak more highly of it. So, but when I went, I looked at the special guest list and I was like, oh my gosh, I know all these people because they all do the same thing I do. They commentate on Dungeons and Dragons, right? Well, I have a special relationship with Professor Dungeon Master in that I have done no less than half a dozen videos over the years, and one of them is not even a month old, right? And it's like, hey, Professor Dungeon Master is wrong about this thing. And I love to do it, right? And I love to do it for a couple reasons. One, his content is great, but he is often on the other side of an issue than me because we don't look at Dungeons and Dragons in the same perspective, right? Now, the other thing is, over the years, I've begun to roll harder and harder at Professor Dungeon Master. And the reason why is I love to verbally spar. Right? I want to get in the verbal ring and throw some some verbal jabs and some verbal roundhouses, right? And it's just something I like to do. I like live debate. I like to be in a lively, robust disagreement, right? Among intellectual peers, emotional peers, spiritual peers, right? But I have found over the years that when you verbally spar on the internet, not a lot of people can do it. Almost nobody can do it. And the reason why is one, um, eventually, often it will turn into ad hominem attack. That's not cool, right? It'll go off topic, and people are saying, "Oh, you're fat, or you're delusional, or you're like not smart, or you're stupid," blah 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 blah. That's one way it can go south. Other times, if you really verbally beat someone down, they can get very upset, right? And they can be like, "Oh, I'm going to do X, Y, Z, and there's going to be consequences for you talking mean to me." It's definitely a thing. I've run into it, right? But what really blew me away was, and one of the reasons why I continue to make these videos is Professor Dungeon Master. He's like, hey, my game is Deathbringer, right? And he's like, hey, I'm a tough guy, and I run tough Dungeons and Dragons, and I run a tough game, and he just stands up like a man, right? Like, and just like, hey, okay, let's do this, right? And the reality is we live in a really odd time, right? Like, we live in a time where, grabbing a great sword and a shield doesn't help anything. There's no space. No man today goes into physical combat. Even like the best soldiers we have in America, where are you going to do, like, we're not even in any wars, right? Like, there's really no space for physical violence or anything that's really tough, right? So none of us know if we would be a tough person, right? But we do have a clue from our intellectual, our emotional, and our spiritual toughness, right? And I really feel that Professor Dungeon Master displays that. So when I went to this convention, I saw him and Bob Worldbuilder, and I went over and I said, hey guys, thanks for coming to Philadelphia. And the two of them looked at me kind of odd, like just kind of nodded, and I realized, and they didn't really say anything, and I was like, oh man, I've made videos against the content of both of these guys, and I want to say that clear, against the content, right? That's my point. If you want to roll at me in the comments and say your content is terrible, you're wrong on this subject, go to town, right? You're only going to see me upset if it's an ad hominem attack, and I'm astonished how often it's an ad hominem attack. Usually it's an ad hominem attack from the first comment, right? And so I was really stunned with how, and so and then I was like, well, that's that, but then and I was like, Bob Worldbuilder and Professor Dungeon Master don't like me. Now, the reality was they just didn't recognize, or actually, Professor Dungeon Master simply didn't recognize me, right? And so basically, and the reason why I know this is I went to his panel, which was packed. It was literally filled. Every seat was full, right? And so I squeeze in, and I ask him a question during his panel, right? And he's like, "Oh, hey, Jay." All right. Now I go by Jay Scott Garibay, and so he recognized me immediately, and he answered my question, which was spot on to the content of the panel, right? And then and then afterwards he came over and he's like, "Hey, I saw your latest video where you said I was wrong and I liked it." And then he sat down with me and we watched Ben Milton's next panel together. I was blown away. And we talk like peers. And he asked me about my channel, how I make my content. I was able to ask him some questions, and I was able to, say, "Hey, it's a real honor. Thank you so much for coming to Philadelphia." And it was amazing. And he treated me like a peer. He was really cool. And I think, and we don't know who would be a really tough guy on the battlefield. Like, we just don't live in those times, right? But the reality is, in my humble opinion, Professor Dungeon Master is tough, intellectually, emotionally, and spiritually. And this is a guy who's incredibly self-aware. And I think the reason he received me the way he did is he knows who he is. He's got 120,000 subs. He's got a 100K sub button. I'm just, I'm just a YouTuber doing the best he can, making no commercial, I have no commercial end. And I think he understands. I'm not punching down. I'm not verbally or virtually punching down, right? And he's just self-aware and realizes he has plot armor at this point, right? Like, there's nothing I can do. Any attention I bring to his channel is just views for him. And so few people in our space understand that, which is incredible. So I was incredibly blessed. He was incredibly kind. And I just want to, skip my next video. Go watch his. He's got a much better channel than mine, and he's a much better person than me. All the best to Professor Dungeon Master. I love his content. I'll probably do another one saying he's wrong about XYZ. But it was an incredible honor to meet him. Every single word you heard in this video is my humble opinion. Nothing more, nothing less. The important part is when I get to hear your humble opinion. When you get in the comments and send your traffic. Please consider like, subscribing, and have a fetch millennium.